Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Joe Biden's presidential term ends in 4 days, but instead of packing up to leave, he is pushing last-minute legislation, as if to make up for 4 years and the 570 days that he was away on vacation. He was holidaying for 40% of his time in office. Now he's cracking down on all things Chinese. Yesterday we told you about the chip bans. Today it is car bans. Biden has banned hardware and software made in China in the name of national security. But we dig deeper to find that it's a ploy to secure America's tech hegemony. Meanwhile, China has turned the tables, using American tricks and American surveillance tools to spy on America, including hacking the phones of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. We'll bring you the full report. Is ChatGPT responsible for the wildfires in California? Why Trump's external tariffs is a misleading claim. How India's new warships mark the dawn of the maritime era. All 3 vessels are made in India. Should cricket players take their families with them on overseas tours? We tell you what's the problem with this debate. Why the US has dropped Cuba from the list of countries which are state sponsors of terrorism. What will this year's appraisal look like? Should you expect a hike in the age of artificial intelligence? We bring you the findings of a new report. Why are India's camels disappearing? Their population has dropped by 80% in the last 6 decades. And why experts say it is time to redefine obesity and overhaul its diagnosis. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Poland says Russia plotted acts of terror against airlines worldwide. Prime Minister Donald Tusk made the accusation while hosting the Ukrainian president. Warsaw has been one of Kiev's biggest allies since the Ukraine war started in 2022. Volodymyr Zelensky has been holding a flurry of meetings with allies ahead of Donald Trump's return to the White House. Germany plans to allow its army to shoot down suspicious drones. It comes after several drone sightings over military sites and other critical infrastructure. Berlin has been on high alert for hybrid attacks from Moscow. The latest case involves suspected Russian espionage in Bavaria. Bangladesh's Supreme Court acquits former Prime Minister Khaleda Zia. This relates to a 2008 corruption case. The ruling clears the way for the ailing leader to fight the parliamentary election. Zia's party, the BNP, wants polls to be held by August this year. Bangladesh has been ruled by an interim government since last August. Mozambique inaugurates its new president. Daniel Chapo takes the oath of office in a heavily guarded ceremony. This follows weeks of violent demonstrations over the disputed election result. Chapo's swearing in extends his party's 50-year rule of the gas-rich African nation. Impeached South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol is finally arrested, ending a weeks-long standoff with the authorities. Yoon has been held over his failed martial law bid in December. He is the first sitting president to be detained in South Korea's history. And India to co-chair the Paris Artificial Intelligence Summit in February. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has confirmed his participation. French President Emmanuel Macron has also invited Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Industry heavyweights like OpenAI Sam Altman, Mistral AI CEO, will also be in attendance. Joe Biden is on a banning spree. He's got just 4 days left as US president and he wants to make the most of it. Every day he's targeting something new. First it was Chinese electric vehicles, then it was China's chip industry, and now it is all Chinese cars. That's right. Biden has unveiled new rules for Chinese vehicles. They would ban nearly all Chinese cars from the US market. It's a pretty drastic move. but not a surprising one. The US will go to any lengths to preserve its hegemony, whether it's by using military force or diplomatic blackmail or such targeted bans. So tonight, let's take a closer look at US policy. Why are they banning Chinese cars? Where else does US hegemony exist, and how are they preserving it? The new auto rules were announced by the US on Tuesday. They target connected or smart cars, which are basically vehicles with internet. They help you navigate, get real-time traffic data, unlock and lock remotely, and also access games and movies. Sort of like a vehicular smartphone. Such smart cars are becoming popular nowadays. By 2030, they're expected to make up 95% of all cars on the road. So the US wants to keep China away. Say your car has a Chinese Bluetooth system, or a Chinese Wi-Fi connector, or a Chinese autopilot, basically any Chinese software or hardware linked to smart functions, then those cars cannot be sold in the US. The rules won't apply immediately. The software curbs will be imposed from 2027 and the hardware curbs from 2029. They will first apply to passenger cars only, but then they can be extended to commercial ones too. So it's a very expansive move. The question is why? As always, national security. That's the reason Americans love to give. Listen to the US Commerce Secretary.
Cars today aren't just steel on wheels, they're computers. They have cameras, microphones, GPS tracking, and other technologies that are connected to the internet. Through this rule, the Commerce Department is taking a necessary step to safeguard U.S. national security and protect Americans' privacy by keeping foreign adversaries from manipulating these technologies to access sensitive or personal information.
Now, there is some truth here. Smart cars can be a privacy nightmare. They collect all kinds of data from drivers. In theory, this data can be shared with the Chinese regime. So yes, it is a privacy concern. Having said that, we cannot look at this move in isolation. Look at everything leading up to it. Last year, Biden raised tariffs on Chinese EVs. This year, he put China's largest battery maker on a blacklist. And this week, he tightened chip supply to China. If you add all this up, one thing becomes clear. This is not about privacy. This is about preserving American hegemony, protecting their dominance in key sectors. And the strategy is pretty clear. Squeeze out the competition using pressure. A clear example of that is TikTok. Most other social media platforms are American, but TikTok is owned by China. So what did the US do? They're forcing China to sell the platform. Again, the same excuse, that of national security. Another example is undersea internet cables. Most of them are laid and repaired by Western companies. But in the last decade, China jumped in. In 2018, Meta and Amazon decided to lay cables in Southeast Asia. They also roped in China Mobile and US meddling. Washington put pressure on Meta and Amazon, so by 2021, China Mobile was out of the deal. Why? The same national security excuse. And don't get us wrong here, China does pose a national security risk. They are known for hacking and espionage. But guess what? The Americans do the same thing. Let's go back to TikTok. The US accuses them of sharing data with China's government. But America does the very same thing. Look at numbers from 2013 to 2022. The US made 3.3 million requests for user data. 3.3 million requests. Basically, they asked tech giants like Meta and Apple to give personal information. America was number one on that list. They requested twice as much as the European Union. So what moral authority do the Americans have? The same US also spied on its own allies. They snooped on European leaders from 2012 to 2014. Chances are they're still doing it. Yet the US claims to defend freedoms and privacy. Today, their target is China. Tomorrow, it could be India or Japan. Basically, anyone who gives competition to the Americans. So what's the solution? Ideally, we need neutral alternatives. If not, at least homegrown ones. Many countries have already started doing this. Take data centers, for example. US tech giants store most of their data in America, but recently countries have started fighting this. They're asking tech giants to store data locally. And this is just one example. The US has created dozens of systems to serve their interest in the economy, in communications, and in defense. It will take a global campaign to weaken it, and the US knows that will never happen. So America is trying to block China. It doesn't want Americans to use Chinese apps and cars, and it doesn't want China to get access to American technology. But what if China manages to steal America's secrets? That too from the most powerful US leaders like Donald Trump, the next president of the United States, J.D. Vance, the incoming vice president, and Kamala Harris, the current vice president. Believe it or not, China tried to hack these leaders, and to some extent, it did succeed. China hacked the telecom providers they use. In fact, it hacked at least 9 American telecom companies. This includes names like AT&T and Verizon. These are America's top 2 providers. China managed to breach them and 7 others, and from there, it targeted top American politicians. Beijing tried to eavesdrop on their calls, read their text messages. Basically, the Chinese tried to set up a sweeping wiretap. At this point, it is not clear if any sensitive information was compromised, but reports say the hackers gained, and I'm quoting, they gained deep and broad access. Trump's family members were targeted too. So were the aides of Kamala Harris and even congressional staff. These are the aides of politicians in the US Congress. Even they were not spared. So who orchestrated such a massive hack? It's a group of hackers. The US is calling them Salt Typhoon. This group, Salt Typhoon, is said to have the backing of the Chinese state. We know little about them. They pulled off one of the biggest hacks in American history. How did they do it? Through backdoors. That's what experts say. These backdoors are created by telecom companies for the US government. US intelligence agencies use them for surveillance and intelligence gathering. They're also used to monitor targets within the United States. Some of these backdoors are set up at the request of American courts. This is for domestic investigations. And it is quite the irony. America may have been compromised by its own surveillance tools. Call it bad luck or poetic justice. Either way, this should alarm everyone. As of today, the full extent of the breach is not clear. Even with all their expertise, the Americans have not been able to figure it out yet. Needless to say, this could have dire consequences for America's national security. What kind of data did the Chinese hackers access? Certainly more than just the phone numbers. Did they record calls made by Trump or Harris? Did they intercept their text messages? What if they caught their aides discussing classified intelligence and information? Did China manage to capture that too? None of these possibilities can be ruled out. This hack apparently began in 2022. It was discovered only last year. So for 2 years, Chinese hackers had access to American telecom networks. Beijing could be sitting on a wealth of intelligence, but as expected, it is denying all of this. China has dismissed all claims related to this hack.
We have repeatedly stated our position on such groundless accusations that lack evidence. China consistently opposes all forms of hacking, and we are even more opposed to the dissemination of false information against China for political purposes.
China says the US is lying. Obviously, it's not like China will admit to hacking top US leaders. Meanwhile, these reports have sent the US government into a tizzy. Former and current US officials are sounding the alarm. They describe the hack as devastating. One of them said, and I'm quoting, "Washington is screwed." Last month, Marco Rubio spoke about this. He is Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of State, so effectively he's the next Foreign Minister of America. Rubio said, and I'm quoting again, "That's about as bad as it gets." But will Rubio confront the Chinese about this hack? We'll have to wait and see. Until then, the US is taking more precautions. Government officials have been issued new advisories. They have been asked to switch to secure apps like Signal. Espionage helped America dominate the world order. Now it is getting a taste of its own medicine, and that too from its biggest adversary. Los Angeles continues to battle devastating wildfires. Over a week has passed, yet the inferno is still spreading. How did the fire start? Investigators are searching for answers. Speculation is running wild. Climate change, faulty power lines, deliberate arson, mismanagement of resources, anything and everything is being blamed. But one theory is gaining more traction than the rest. ChatGPT caused the wildfires. That's right, social media has a new scapegoat, ChatGPT, the same AI chatbot that can do maths and pen poems. Before we tell you why, let's quickly also look at the situation on the ground. 25 people have died. 6 million remain under a fire threat. 2 fires are currently active, the Palisades and the Eaton fires. Firefighters are battling these blazes, but powerful winds make it very difficult. The conditions are expected to ease this weekend, but Los Angeles still has a long road to recovery. Which brings us to the culprit. Social media users say ChatGPT caused the fires. But is that true? Is ChatGPT really responsible for the fires? And why is social media blaming artificial intelligence? To understand that, let's look at how ChatGPT works. Imagine you type a prompt into ChatGPT. The prompt is turned into code. This code flows through a network of servers. The servers run thousands of complex calculations, and ultimately they produce the best possible response for you. Now, all of this happens on massive power-hungry servers. These servers work hard, so they generate heat. Lots of heat. And so data centers need to prevent overheating. For that, they rely on cooling systems. And this is where water plays a crucial role. Cooling towers use vast amounts of water just to keep servers at optimal temperatures. Essentially, ChatGPT is a water guzzler. To put it in perspective, a 100-word email needs around a bottle of water. Same for every 4 to 5 prompts. ChatGPT gulps almost 500 ml of water for this. Now let's zoom out and look at the larger picture. In 2024, ChatGPT had 300 million weekly active users. 300 million weekly active users. So you can imagine the amount of energy it consumed and the scale of water it needed. And that is why social media is complaining. Los Angeles is located in Southern California. This is a region that has experienced drought in the past, which means water is already scarce here. The wildfires exposed that scarcity and made it worse. The fires began on January 7th. Soon, fire hydrants were low on water. The LA Fire Department was panned, and that's when social media started connecting the dots. ChatGPT relies on water. Los Angeles is running out of water. So naturally, ChatGPT must be to blame. The fact is, this theory holds little water. The fire hydrants ran dry because of overwhelming demand. On top of that, the municipal water system is poorly designed. It cannot handle the demands of fast-moving wildfires. So this is not an AI problem. This is an infrastructure problem. But that does not let ChatGPT off the hook entirely. Yes, it is responsible for this particular fire, but it is very much part of a bigger problem. Our planet is heating up. Extreme weather events are becoming increasingly common, like these wildfires in Los Angeles. Addressing this crisis needs collective action. You need to conserve natural resources like water. Instead, you're building more AI data centers that use gallons of water and electricity to write emails. So you can see where the problem is. The crisis in LA is a wake-up call. It's not just about the technologies we use today, it's about how we manage the infrastructure that supports this tech. AI companies will also have to do better. They must find other cooling alternatives or move data centers to cooler climates. After all, the future of AI does not just lie in the promise of intelligence, it lies in how responsibly it can be integrated into our world. As for that email that you're delaying, you don't need ChatGPT to write it. You can type it out yourself. It will only take 5 more minutes of your time.
Hi, Donald John Trump.
And I'm doing the same thing with China. We're going to tariff the hell out of them. And we're going to put very serious tariffs on Mexico and Canada.
Donald Trump has made an announcement, the birth of a new U.S. government agency called the External Revenue Service, ERS. It will be born next Monday, January 20th, the day of his inauguration. Trump said all of this on social media. He said the new agency will collect tariffs, duties and revenue from foreign sources. A small problem with that though. Tariffs are not collected from foreign sources, they are collected from importers. Importers who are sitting in America. The name External Revenue Service has a nice ring to it, but it's not really accurate. To understand this, let's dive into the tariff debate, starting with the most basic question: what is a tariff? It is a tax on an imported good, anything made abroad. Let's say a car is manufactured in China, made in a Chinese factory by Chinese employees. Let's assume that the manufacturing cost of this car is $20,000. This includes the cost of material and the wages paid to the Chinese employees, $20,000. So what happens when this car is built and ready for export? It's not like the Chinese government or the factory will open up a stall in the US. Xi Jinping is not meeting American border guards. He's not slipping them a 50 to get in and sell Chinese goods in the US. No, the Chinese factory has a partner sitting in the United States, someone who buys the car from them and then sells it in America. This partner is the importer. The importer pays $20,000 for the Chinese car, plus of course the shipping cost. Then they try to sell it at one of their showrooms in the United States. So the Chinese factory made money even before the car hit the streets. Their part is done. It is the US-based importer who has to sell it further to American citizens. So when Donald Trump imposes tariffs, it is the same US-based importer who pays the additional amount. Trump says he will impose a blanket 10% tariff on all imports. He threatened higher tariffs on Mexico and Canada, going up to 25%, and China may have it even worse, tariffs as high as 60%, 60. So let's go back to our car example and add the 60% tariff to the equation. The US-based importer paid $20,000 for the Chinese car. He paid another 10% as shipping cost, which brings it to $22,000. That was the importer's original cost. He would have sold the car for maybe $23,000 to make a profit. But now the importer has to pay a 60% tariff as well. So $20,000 for the car, $2,000 for shipping, and then a whopping $12,000 in tariffs, coming to a total of $34,000. If the importer still wants to keep his profit the same, he needs to charge $35,000 for his made in China car. So who is making money here? And who's really paying? The Chinese factory is not affected. It was paid $20,000 for the car. The importer made his $1,000 profit. The US government, however, made a lot of money. They made $12,000 in tariff revenue. And who paid them that money? It is the American consumer. That's right. The average American is the one paying for these tariffs. And that is why Donald Trump's External Revenue Service seems like a marketing gimmick. Because the revenue won't be external. It will be shelled out by American citizens. So then why is Trump doing it? It will definitely lead to soaring inflation. There is no debate about that. However, there might be long-term benefits. Think about what you would do in a situation like this. A foreign good is suddenly more expensive, but domestic goods still cost the same. The Chinese car was $23,000, it is now $35,000. Meanwhile, the American car was $30,000 and that price remains the same, $30,000. So it is suddenly cheaper than the foreign alternative. Wouldn't you consider buying local then? This is protectionism 101. Make foreign goods more expensive, forcing your citizens to buy local. It's not a new strategy. It's been done all over the world to protect domestic industries. America has lost a lot of its manufacturing jobs over the years. It has outsourced operations to foreign countries, to places like China, where they don't have to pay employees that much. The wages are lower. But with tariffs, China loses that cost advantage. American companies won't have much to gain by manufacturing goods abroad, so they might as well move back to the US, and this is why foreign nations are spooked by Trump's tariffs. because demand for their exports will go down. Companies might relocate to the United States. They might move back home. So the foreign nation will be left with an empty factory and mass layoffs. That is why tariffs are a threat. Not because they will have to pay added fees, but because of the long-term ramifications. Those are the pros and cons of tariffs in a nutshell. But I should add something here. Moving manufacturing jobs takes time. It does not happen overnight. So at least in the short run, Americans will have to deal with rampant inflation. And don't think that there won't be any retaliation, because America exports goods too. If it imposes a blanket tariff, if every other nation is targeted, then there will be reciprocal tariffs, leading to a global trade war. Everyone could start opting for protectionism, changing the global economic order as we know it. It's the dawn of a new maritime era for India. New Delhi has unveiled 3 new naval titans: frigate INS Nilgiri, destroyer INS Surat, and attack submarine INS Vaghshir. All 3 of them were made in India for the Indian Navy. Now, this is a remarkable milestone, commissioning all 3 assets in one go. These new additions symbolize 3 main things: India's naval prowess, its growing self-reliance, and its moves to counter China in the Indian Ocean region. Our next report brings you all the details.
It's a first for the Indian Navy and a historic moment for the country. India has simultaneously commissioned 3 naval giants, 2 indigenously developed warships, the INS Nilgiri and the INS Surat, and an attack submarine, the INS Vaghshir.
21वीं सदी की नेवी को सशक्त करने की तरफ हम एक बहुत बड़ा कदम उठा रहे हैं। ये पहली बार हो रहा है जब एक डिस्ट्रॉयर, एक फ्रिगेट और एक सबमरीन, तीनों को एक साथ कमीशन किया जा रहा है। और सबसे गर्व की बात कि ये तीनों फ्रंटलाइन प्लेटफॉर्म्स मेड इन इंडिया है।
There's a lot of firsts for New Delhi here. All 3 were made in India itself, and all 3 were commissioned at one go. It's an unprecedented show of maritime prowess and self-reliance, and India's strategic intent to establish itself as a formidable maritime power, while responding to regional geopolitical challenges. So let's look at the Navy's new assets. The first is the INS Nilgiri. It's the flagship vessel of a new class of frigates called Project 17A. It has enhanced stealth features and state-of-the-art technology. The INS Nilgiri can operate without any supporting vessels. The second is the INS Surat. It's part of Project 15B, or Vishakhapatnam class. It's a guided missile destroyer weighing approximately 8,000 tons. But the most striking feature is that it's India's first AI-enabled warship. Also, it just took 31 months to go from launch to commissioning. Which brings us to the INS Vaghshir, the 6th Scorpion-class submarine under the Kalvari class Project 75. It's known as a hunter-killer submarine. It has superior stealth features and can take on a range of missions like intelligence gathering and anti-surface warfare.
ये तीनों प्लेटफॉर्म्स भारतीय नौसेना की क्षमता को सशक्त एवं प्रभावशाली बनाएंगे। इससे हमारे सामुद्रिक हितों की सुरक्षा और भी मजबूत होगी। मुझे यह बताते हुए बहुत खुशी हो रही है कि नौसेना ने अपना हाई टेम्पो ऑफ ऑपरेशंस बरकरार रखा है। इससे हिंद महासागर क्षेत्र में हमारे नेशनल मैरीटाइम इंटरेस्ट को सेफगार्ड करने में और प्रधानमंत्री जी के सागर सिक्योरिटी एंड ग्रोथ फॉर ऑल इन द रीजन विजन को सक्षम करने में हम सफल हुए हैं।
This is a push by India to upgrade its naval assets, especially those from the Soviet era, and the government has spent a lot of money on it. In 2024, a record $15 billion was spent on domestic defense manufacturing. That's a 17% rise from the previous year. According to the government, over 75% of the warships are developed in-house. This comes as New Delhi wants to expand its naval fleet. The Indian Navy's present force comprises of about 150 ships and submarines. It wants to take it up to 170 in the next decade. And this commissioning is not merely a statement of military readiness, but a clear response to regional dynamics for strategic influence over the Indian Ocean. You see, China is expanding its naval fleet at an unparalleled pace. Pakistan is collaborating with Beijing to build a 50-ship navy. So India's actions send a message of resolve and capability in the region. This marks a defining moment in India's journey toward maritime self-reliance and strategic preeminence. As these vessels take to the seas, they carry not just weapons, but the aspirations of a nation poised to lead in this century.
Indian cricket bosses are making some big changes. We lost the recent series in Australia, so some big names have been dropped. And no, I don't mean the players, I mean their families. The Indian Cricket Board, or the BCCI, wants to limit the presence of families on tour. Suppose there is a long series abroad, more than 45 days in total, then the family can stay for 14 days only. That too after the first 2 weeks. If it's a short tour, they can stay up to 1 week. Now, just to be clear, these rules existed before the pandemic too, but during lockdown, they were relaxed. The game was being played in a bubble, so players could take their families along. The pandemic ended, but this practice carried on. Now, the BCCI says not anymore. It's time to limit family time on tours. The question is this the right call? Let's look at the timing and context first. India has just lost an important series in Australia. Days later, you decide to curb the presence of families. Naturally, people will draw links. It looks like you're blaming the families for the poor result. And it's quite common in India. When players fail, their partners get the blame. We have seen that with Virat Kohli and Anushka Sharma. When Kohli does not get runs, social media erupts, and one section always blames his wife. The BCCI is giving ammunition to such people, whether on purpose or not. Which brings us to the larger question. Should families accompany players at all? Current coach Gautam Gambhir had an interesting take on it. Listen to what he said in 2018, and I'm quoting, "The player opinion varies. Some want family to be there for the whole tour, while others want little family time and they try to concentrate. Whatever the decision, it should be taken in the best interest of Indian cricket." That's a solid take. Some players like having their family around. It gives them confidence. It also keeps them relaxed. But not everyone may feel that way. Maybe some players like to be left alone. Either way, it is their decision to make. We are talking about adult athletes here. People entrusted with winning championships and trophies. Surely they can take this call. Let's look at how other sports do it. In tennis, families are a constant presence in the stands. In Wimbledon, it's a bit of a ritual. If you win, you climb up and embrace your family. Same in Formula One. The families are always around in the paddock. Just look at current champion Max Verstappen. His father attends virtually every race. But in team sports, it can be tricky. In 2019, Brazil banned wives and girlfriends from the Copa America event. They ended up winning the whole thing. At the 2006 World Cup, England did the opposite. The wives and girlfriends were free to visit, but when England lost, the tabloids blamed them. At the 2012 Olympics, Australia's swimming team banned family visits. A number of athletes lashed out at the decision. They complained of loneliness and demotivation. So clearly the results vary. It also depends on what the coach and captain wants. They have their own style and culture, and they will want the team to follow it, to embrace a common belief. Now, we are not saying forget all that. We are saying do not forget the larger picture. Has anyone blamed husbands when women athletes fail? Not that we can think of. In fact, the opposite happens. When women succeed, men get the credit. In the 2016 Olympics, a Hungarian swimmer set a world record. The camera cut to her husband, and the commentator called him the man responsible for the feat. Same year, the Chicago Tribune dropped this pearl. Look at the headline. Wife of a Bears' lineman wins a bronze medal today in Rio Olympics. Unfortunately, this is the world we live in, and decisions must account for that. You cannot depict partners as a distraction, as something that hurts results. If you do, you're setting a dangerous precedent. If players fail, blame them. Blame the board, the coaches, and the support staff. But if you're blaming the family, you're clearly clutching at straws. Our next story is about Cuba. It's an island nation in the Caribbean Sea, and it has been a thorn in America's side for decades. The US views Cuba as an enemy nation, and it has tried everything to destabilize the country. The US declared Cuba a state sponsor of terrorism back in 1982, over 4 decades ago. It was a way for Washington to put pressure on Havana. But yesterday, Joe Biden undid this. He rescinded the state sponsor of terrorism designation with a presidential order. It's a strange thing to do. Just days before the end of his presidency, Biden seems to have created a new dilemma for Donald Trump. Here's our report.
It seems like Joe Biden just doesn't care anymore. He's doing whatever he feels like just before leaving office. He'll be gone this time next week, but he'll be leaving a new problem behind for his successor, Donald Trump. The problem of what to do about Cuba. Biden just provided some massive relief to the Caribbean island. He removed Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. Cuba has been on that list almost continuously since 1982. It was removed briefly between 2015 and 2021. This was done by Barack Obama. Obama had tried to improve relations with Havana when he was in power. But in 2021, Trump undid this. He put Cuba back on the list, and Cuba has stayed there until yesterday. Once again, it has become a headache for Donald Trump. To understand why, let's look at Cuba's history. It is a communist country, controlled by the Communist Party of Cuba since the late 1950s. Since Fidel Castro led a revolution there and took control of the island. Castro and Cuba then went on to encourage other revolutions all over the world. This greatly upset their biggest neighbor, the United States. Washington was already irritated about having a communist nation at its doorstep, and now this nation was preaching more revolutions. The US could not allow this. It did not want Cuba fanning revolutionary flames. So it clashed with the communist government. The US even tried to invade. Troops landed in the Bay of Pigs in 1961, but the Cuban communists would not be ousted. So the US tried a different type of warfare instead, economic warfare. There was already an embargo on Cuban goods. It was imposed in 1958, and it is still in effect. It's the most enduring trade embargo in modern history. The US used it to cripple Cuba's economy for decades. Look at this note by a former US official. He said a policy should be adopted to weaken the economic life of Cuba, to decrease monetary and real wages, to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of government. So this is the official US policy towards the island. In the 1980s, the US decided that the embargo wasn't doing enough. So it added Cuba to the newly formed list of state sponsors of terrorism. This gave the US even more powers to sanction Cuba. But it's been 4 decades and the communists are still in charge. So clearly, the economic warfare hasn't worked. Former US President Barack Obama removed Cuba from the list in 2015, but Trump relisted Cuba in 2021, just before leaving office. So now it seems Biden is returning the favor. But is it just about getting back at Trump? Biden will probably point to this news and say he did it to secure the release of prisoners. Cuba has agreed to release 553 prisoners over time. Havana announced this just after Biden removed it from the state sponsor of terrorism list. So there was something in it for the US, but the prisoner release is also a problem for Trump, because it'll be gradual. Cuba knows that Trump could just reverse the order next week. It has acknowledged this in its official statement. But the slow release of prisoners could force Trump's hand for a while, at least until all of them are out.
Well, we have to see what Trump is next. Knowing him, it's possible they quit this week, and that Trump comes and everything goes backward. I see it as somewhat useless because of how many advantages we will have and how long. A couple of weeks, a few days.
Trump will probably relist Cuba the moment all the prisoners are free. Even if he doesn't, the US still has its embargo, and Cuba's economy will never thrive unless that is gone.
We are well into 2025 now. A few months later, it will be hike season. You worked hard the whole year, but will you get rewarded for it? Will there be a hike in the age of artificial intelligence? And what will your increment look like? Well, if you work in India, a new report has some clues. It was prepared by consulting firm Mercer. They looked at more than 1,500 companies from India, from the tech sector, from financial services, from consumer goods, and from manufacturing. And what did they find? Overall, salary hikes are expected to be 9.4%. This is the expected average across industries. And the auto sector leads the way. Their average hike is expected to be around 10%. Manufacturing and engineering come second. If you work in these sectors, you can expect a 9.7% hike. Let's answer the obvious question here. Is this good enough? How does it compare to the rest of the world? In Southeast Asia, the hikes are expected to be much lower, between 4 and 7%. And in the US, it is expected to be around 4%. But remember, India's inflation remains a lot higher. If prices rise too much, they negate your salary hike. That's one thing to note. Secondly, what is India's trajectory? In 2023, Indian salaries were expected to grow by 9.5%. In 2024, they were expected to grow by 10%. And in 2025, the projection is 9.4%. So hikes have stagnated in recent years, which is very different from the pandemic era. In 2020, India's expected salary hike was just 8%. So on this metric, things have improved since COVID. The report also has other good news. It says 37% companies plan to increase their headcount in 2025. Basically, they will hire more people. But their type of remuneration is changing. 75% companies are now using performance-linked incentive of PLI. It is exactly what it sounds like. One portion of your compensation will be variable. It is not a fixed pay, it is variable. It will depend on your performance, sometimes your company's performance. If you do well, you get the money. If you don't, you will get only a part of it. The idea is to push employees to work harder, to give them incentive to work. Of course, this is all projection. We'll only know for sure once increment season arrives. Infosys will be among the first of the lot. Their pay hikes are expected to roll out by February. By June, the hike season should end. And there are three factors to watch out for. The first is the union budget. Reports say the government is considering an income tax cut. That won't increase your salary, but it will increase your disposable income. You'll have more money in hand, money that you can spend or save. The second factor is artificial intelligence. Around 55% Indian firms have adopted AI. So if employees do not upskill, they could lose out. Their jobs could be taken over by AI. And finally, the third factor, corporate policy. Indian companies have been making more money than ever. Their profits are at a 15-year high. But they've been reluctant to offer corresponding hikes to employees. Will they change that this year? The forecast is not too good. Corporate earnings are expected to be muted in the first few months, so a bumper hike looks unlikely. A lot will also depend on the overall sentiment. India's GDP rebounded quickly after the pandemic, but now there are signs of a slowdown. GDP growth was 8.2% in the last financial year. This time, it is expected to be 6.4%, which would be the lowest in 4 years. All these variables could end up deciding your hike this year. The only way to know for sure is to wait. Now let's talk about camels, the ships of the desert. Their global population is soaring. According to the United Nations, in the 1960s, it stood at 13 million, the global camel population, 13 million. Today it is 35 million. But this boost cannot be seen in India. Here, the camel population is declining. It has seen a drop of 80% in the past 6 decades. And the fall has been sharper in recent years. So what's behind this dip? And what can put these camels over the hump? Here is a report.
Over centuries, these majestic ships of the desert have evolved, and how? Camels have become one of the most important animals for humans living in some of the harshest conditions. From South to West Asia and Africa, Chad has more camels than any other country in the world. About 10 million of them. Followed by Somalia, Sudan, and Kenya. Then comes Saudi Arabia, with about 2 million camels, the highest for West Asia. Across the world, camel population is rising. According to the United Nations, in the 1960s, their population stood at 13 million. Today it stands at 35 million. While the global population is soaring, a camel crisis is brewing in India. Their numbers are on a decline in the world's most populous nation. According to government data, from 1 million camels in 1961 to just 200,000 camels today, that's a dip of 80% in about 6 decades. And the fall has been sharper in recent years. Look at Rajasthan. This is one of the few Indian states where camels are reared. They are bred for transport, wool, and milk. If you visit the desert state, you will find well-groomed camels roaming about, relaxing with mustard oil being applied on their bodies, with their hair trimmed and decorated with colorful beads. 80% of India's camel population is in Rajasthan, and they adorn the desert landscape. But they are under threat in the state. According to the census, in the year 2007, about 420,000 camels lived in Rajasthan alone. By 2012, this number reduced to 325,000, and by 2019, it dipped to about 210,000. That's a fall of 35% in 7 years. What's behind this drastic decline? A major reason is the surge in development in Western India. New roads and vehicles have replaced camels as a major mode of transportation. Plus, new irrigation projects have led to an increase in farmlands. They have brought installation of new wind and solar farms. Now, the camels have lesser space to graze on. So India's top animal husbandry official has recently called for more support. She has urged the need to protect camels by preserving grazing lands and promoting camel milk. You see, in recent years, camel milk has been touted a health drink the world over. It has low amounts of sugar, and it is rich in vitamins and minerals. Nutritionists call it the next superfood, so there is immense potential here. According to reports, thanks to the growing demands, up to 70 camel herders milk nearly 2,000 camels in Rajasthan, generating up to $670,000. But there is more potential here. Boosting camel milk production could fuel the income of camel herders and incentivize the protection of these majestic animals. Instead of leaving them high and dry, India's camels need a policy boost to get over the hump.
Now let's talk about obesity. It affects more than 1 billion people the world over. It ails some countries more than others. Like in India and the US, nearly 3/4 are overweight or obese. In the UK, nearly 2/3, and in China, half the population is overweight or obese. Obesity is a global epidemic, and it has been one for 30 years now. But here's the kicker. We don't know what obesity is. We don't understand it. You may say it is a disease, obviously, but it's not that simple. Some countries call it a disease, like the US, Canada, Germany, and Italy. Some call it a public health issue, like India, China, and Japan. And others, like Saudi Arabia and Denmark, call it a risk factor. Obesity is a polarizing topic for doctors, insurers, governments, and patients. Few are on the same page, but this is the reality. In the next 10 years, half of the world will be overweight or obese. And this will cost the global economy. How much? About $3 trillion every year. Meanwhile, the demand for weight loss drugs will continue to soar. In the next 5 years, they will have a $200 billion market. This is a crisis in the making, so the obesity dispute is coming to a head, and experts are rushing to find answers. Now they have a proposal. A new global report is out. It is supported by more than 50 medical experts. And they propose what they call a radical overhaul, a complete overhaul of how we define obesity and how we diagnose it. Before we talk more about this, before we understand why we need a shake-up, let's understand the problem. So according to the present definition, what is obesity? It is seen as an excess of body fat, We gauge who has too much fat by using the BMI, the body mass index. The BMI estimates body fat based on a person's height and weight. If your height, it is your height divided by the square of your, it is your weight rather, divided by the square of your height. So if you have a BMI of 30, in many countries you're obese. And there is a major problem with this concept. Some people don't have a BMI of 30, but they have excess body fat and they go undiagnosed because the BMI scale does not think that they are obese. Similarly, some patients have a high BMI, so they're diagnosed with obesity despite having normal organ function and a healthy body. This is the issue with the BMI. For decades, it has been used to diagnose obesity, but the same BMI is at the heart of this new debate. This is what experts say. You see, BMI was never meant to diagnose patients. It only measures the ratio of your height to your weight. It says nothing about your obesity symptoms, your fat accumulation, your fat distribution, your muscle weight, your blood sugar levels. It cannot even determine whether you are healthy or sick. No two human bodies are the same, and the BMI is no way to measure obesity. So now experts want to rethink this standard. They want to go beyond the weight. They want to look at how fat is distributed throughout the body or how excess weight leads to medical complications, from breathlessness while walking to knee pain and organ failure. They want to redefine obesity and acknowledge its reality, because the way it is understood today, obesity makes patients out of people who are not ill and ignore those who need urgent care. We have declared it a disease without really understanding what the disease is. And this has left millions vulnerable. It has left people open to accusations, overtreatment, undertreatment, and mistreatment. So 30 years after declaring obesity an epidemic, medicine is finally doing a better job at figuring out what it is. As they say, better late than never. Capitol Hill was supposed to be all about serious business today, a confirmation hearing for the next U.S. Defense Secretary. One would think it's a moment of dignity, but instead, it turned into something more entertaining. Pete Hegseth is Donald Trump's nominee for this position. He walked in, bracing himself for some tough questions, especially from the Democrats. What he did not expect was a full-on roast. From comments about women in combat to allegations of alcohol-fueled misadventures, a parade of affairs, and of course, some financial mismanagement. Hegseth's track record turned out to be more like a buffet of controversy. It was less of a confirmation hearing and more like a reality TV episode. Take a look.
You name the importance of at least one of the nations in the ASEAN and what type of agreement we have with at least one of those nations. And how many nations are in ASEAN, by the way?
I couldn't tell you the exact amount of nations in that, but I know we have allies in South Korea and Japan and in AUKUS with Australia, trying to work on submarines with them.
Mr. Hegseth, none of those countries are in ASEAN.
Across.
None of those three countries that you've mentioned are in ASEAN.
You can't handle the truth! Son, we live in a world that has walls, and those walls have to be guarded by men with guns. Who's gonna do it? You?
Many of your work colleagues have said that you show up for work under the influence of alcohol or drunk. I know you've denied that, but you would agree with me, right, that if that was the case, that would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense.
Senator, those are all anonymous false claims.
For female service members, knowing full well you have hundreds of women doing that job right now. And the standards, you're 2 Mile Run, Tom.
Well, I guess I better use the senator from Virginia starts bringing up the fact that what if you showed up drunk to your job? How many senators have showed up drunk to vote at night? Have any of you guys asked them to step down and resign from their job? Admitted that you had sex at that hotel in October 2017. You said it was consensual, isn't that correct?
Anything
You've admitted that it was consensual, and you were still married, and you just had a child by another woman.
Again,
How do you explain your judgment?
completely false charges against me.
You
fully investigated, and I was completely clear.
You have admitted that you had sex while you were married to wife 2 after you just had fathered a child by wife 3. You've admitted that.
Do not deny that you made those statements. You have. We take the responsibility of standards very seriously, and we will work with you. I'm equally distressed. You would not meet with me before this hearing.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. SpaceX launches 2 private lunar landers to the moon in an unusual double moonshot launch. In the US, police drone footage shows the dramatic rescue of a man and his dog from a frozen lake, and a rescued baby gorilla seeks comfort during rehabilitation with baby bottles and soft toys. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 2001, Wikipedia was launched. It's an online encyclopedia, free for all. The name is a mix of the Hawaiian word wiki, which means quick, and the word encyclopedia. As of January 2025, Wikipedia has 64 million articles in over 300 languages. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.